Your reign of evil ends here. A classic heroic line to kick things off, right? Mark Stewart Bluemont, the so-called villainous Duke, just stands there smirking, brushing off the party's nasty accusations that he let the royal capital get trampled by demons. He smugly claims he actually saved the people in place of these immature fools, but the hero's party is absolutely not having it. A twin-tailed warrior girl screams she's going to avenge her sister right here and now, while the hero calls him out for turning female prisoners into twisted, modified puppets. Yeah, big yikes right there, definitely demon behavior. But the absolute kicker? The beautiful, starry-eyed girl stepping up to deliver the final blow is none other than his own daughter. With a cold decree that God has witnessed all his vile atrocities, she tells him to accept his punishment with dignity, points her hand at him, mutters a chilling, "Father!" and blasts his glasses right off his face with a massive point-blank explosion of ice. Game over. Cut to the real world, and we see the guy actually controlling this RPG. He's hacking up a lung on his bedroom floor, staring at the screen where the daughter's dialogue reads, "May you rest in peace, Father." Our gamer boy mutters that it's no wonder the Duke's own daughter betrayed him, since he was a pathetic excuse for a parent, telling the pixelated villain to repent in his next life. Unfortunately for our guy, his intense gaming session is violently cut short by a massive medical emergency. Grasping his chest, wheezing for breath, and desperately begging for his meds, he collapses and dies right in front of the title screen of his all-time favorite game, Oriya Old Stories. You'd think that's the end of his story, but nah, this is pure anime logic we're dealing with. Suddenly, a man in a lavish room is staring into a fancy mirror. It's Mark Stewart, looking sharp, very much alive, and completely confused. He strokes his chin, realizing that the handsome, bespectacled face staring back at him looks awfully familiar. As he stares at his own hands, the pieces start clicking together, and the existential panic sets in. A modern Japanese man who threw away his precious youth gaming just woke up inside the body of a 37-year-old Duke of the Intecluse Kingdom, the exact same mid-boss he just watched die. Looking in the mirror, he feels the memories of his past life as an obsessed otaku merging perfectly with the life of the aristocratic Duke. But then, a terrifying thought hits him. Why did his memories return right at this exact moment? He remembers there's a major political event today, the Crown Prince appointment ceremony. Any veteran of the game knows exactly what that means. It's the opening cutscene of the main story. Yep, the game has officially started, which means our reincarnated Duke has exactly 1 year left to live before his own daughter turns him into a human popsicle. Talk about a rigged spawn point. He spent his old life completely obsessed with this fantasy RPG, clearing every single one of its multi-route scenarios 10 times over, playing as the hero, Prince Rox, on an epic journey to save the continent. But instead of reincarnating as the OP protagonist with a cute harem, he's stuck as the doomed villain. Sweating bullets, he desperately recalls the lore. Soon, Duke Mark is supposed to pull a massive villain move called the usurpation of the throne, rule for a hot minute, and then get absolutely bodied by the protagonist's party. Gripping his hair and losing his absolute mind, our guy screams to himself, "I absolutely refuse that. Why couldn't I have become Rox instead?" He aggressively vows to avoid the throne usurpation at all costs to save his own skin, but his total freakout is abruptly cut short by a polite knock at the door. He freezes, wondering if anyone heard him screaming like a maniac, before clearing his throat and trying to regain his noble composure. "Come in," he says as his butler enters the room. And just like that, the survival run of the world's most pathetic, daughter-fearing mid-boss has officially begun. The new Duke quickly pulls himself together as his steward, Mildart, walks in. Mildart nervously brings up some sketchy recent budget allocations, and Mark immediately starts sweating bullets. He realizes these are the exact funds he originally set aside for his evil, throne-usurping villain arc. Seeing the poor butler look so shocked just because his boss is actually listening to him honestly makes Mark feel a massive twinge of guilt. Mildart specifically questions the mass deployment of magic catapults, wondering if it's really an appropriate measure. Thinking on his feet, Mark puts on his best aristocratic face and smoothly deflects, claiming he has reliable intel that the demon race in the north is preparing to march south, so expanding the military is an absolute must, which honestly isn't a lie since he literally knows the game's actual plot. Mildart buys it completely, horrified by the impending demon threat. But before they can discuss it further, a frantic maid bursts into the room, screaming that a monster has escaped from the shed and is attacking the staff. Without missing a beat, Mark declares he'll handle it personally. Mildart is absolutely flabbergasted. The old Mark would never lift a finger to help the servants, but our reincarnated gamer sharply orders his butler to step up and act as his hands and feet. The maid is just as stunned, but quickly leads the way as they sprint toward the terrifying screams echoing down the hall. Out in the courtyard, two terrified maids are desperately fending off a massive, multi-eyed wolf monster with nothing but a broom. Just as the terrifying beast lunges for the kill, Mark slides in like an absolute Chad and one-shots the creature with a single, clean strike of his sword. The maids are completely speechless, dropping to their knees to profusely apologize for causing a commotion. One maid is literally begging him to spare her family, fully expecting the tyrannical Duke to execute her for the inconvenience. But instead, Mark flashes a charming, gentle smile and asks if they're hurt. Seeing him act like a decent human being absolutely breaks everyone's brains. The maids are bewildered, and Mildart looks like he's expecting it to start raining spears from the sky. As Mark walks away smiling, he sighs internally, realizing with a heavy heart that his own staff is legitimately more terrified of him than a literal bloodthirsty monster. Yeah, he really needs to fix this PR nightmare. Mentally reviewing his survival strategy, Mark starts crossing out the classic villain tropes he needs to avoid. No more sketchy magic catapult deployments, absolutely no human experimentation, and definitely canceling those brutal tax increases. He is determined to derail this doomed mid-boss route at all costs. But the biggest hurdle is yet to come. Later that evening, he sits at a massive dining table opposite a beautiful young girl. "Good evening, Father," she says. This is Forsina Blumont, one of the game's main heroines, his future executioner, and his actual daughter. Even at 14, she has the chilling, emotionless beauty of an ice sculpture, totally living up to her in-game nickname, the Ice Princess. As she silently chews her food, Mark nervously swallows hard. If he wants to avoid getting frozen solid in a year, he desperately needs to patch up their practically non-existent relationship. He awkwardly clears his throat to break the ice and asks what she's been studying lately. Without changing her blank expression, Forsina lists off a heavy workload of magic theory, kingdom history, advanced arithmetic, and rhetoric. Trying to keep the dad mode conversation going, he praises her hard work and asks about her magic progress. She casually mentions she's already mastered all 4 basic attributes and is moving on to higher-level theories. Casually conjuring magical sparkles in her hand, as she reveals her mana capacity is already 3 times that of a normal adult. Mark internally geeks out, remembering that she is destined to become an incredibly overpowered archmage later in the story. As expected of the main heroine, he thinks, before quickly smiling and correcting himself in his head. No, as expected of my daughter. Mark tries to play the supportive dad role, awkwardly telling Forsina to keep striving since she cultivated that magical talent through her own hard work. He cringes at how stiff he sounds, but Forsina just bows her head politely, thanking him and stating she's grateful to have inherited his power. But then, the mood instantly drops to absolute zero. Her eyes go totally dead and intense as she promises him that she is doing everything she can to be chosen as queen someday. Boom. Just like that, a massive wave of memories from the original Duke hits Mark like a freight train. He remembers being an absolute monster of a father, tearing up her cute childhood drawings just to make her cry. Check. Ordering the gardener to cut down the beautiful roses she wanted to see with him. Double check. And worst of all, sitting her down on her 14th birthday and coldly ordering her to marry into the royal family for the sake of the Blumont house, telling her it was her sole purpose in life. Floating in a mental void of absolute despair, Mark is screaming internally, realizing what a pathetic garbage-tier dad he's been. As part of his doomed mid-boss route, His grand master plan was to marry Fortuna off to the protagonist, Prince Rox, just to gain political power. And the lore goes even deeper and darker. The original Duke heavily resented Fortuna because his wife died giving birth to her. Fortuna, completely brainwashed by a lifetime of this trauma, sits across from him and calmly states that she must become queen to atone for causing her mother's death. Mark is sweating buckets. He realizes that even if he dodges the main plot, this girl is traumatized enough to ice him anyway. He knows for a fact that if Prince Rox takes an interest in her at the upcoming ceremony, he is guaranteed to hit the bad ending. So he decides to completely derail the narrative train right here and now. He looks her dead in the eye and casually drops a nuke. He's reconsidering marrying her into the royal family. Fortuna is visibly stunned and asks for his reasoning. Mark pushes up his glasses, his brain working in overdrive, and gives her 2 reasons. First, since the house has no male heir, he wants her to stay and bear the next head of the family. Second, and he lays the dad charm on incredibly thick here, he tells her she's grown up to be far more beautiful and intelligent than he ever expected, making her way too precious to just hand over to the royals. In his head, he's furiously monitoring a totally imaginary, subjective favorability meter, but it's barely budging. Panicking that his riz wasn't enough, he goes for the emotional critical hit. He confesses his regrets, sincerely apologizing for making her feel so lonely all these years and wishing they had spent more time together. He admits it's selfish, but emotionally, he just can't bring himself to let her go. Even the maid in the background drops her jaw at this unexpected, unbelievable character development. Fortuna looks down at her plate, processing this massive personality shift, before looking up with a faint blush and a genuinely soft smile. "I see," she whispers. Mark's imaginary favorability meter instantly skyrockets. He internally fist pumps, celebrating this massive W. He warmly declares her his most precious family, telling her he might need her help with his ducal work from now on, as long as she keeps up with her studies. Fortuna happily agrees, leaving Mark feeling like he just took a massive step away from the execution block. Cut to day 2 of his reincarnation. Fortuna is more motivated than ever, secretly vowing to study even harder just to prove her worth and stay by his side. Meanwhile, Mark is sitting in his office, looking out at the knights training in the courtyard. He knows the battle is far from over. Everyone in the territory still thinks he's a tyrannical scumbag. To survive, he figures he needs to test exactly how much of his overpowered game knowledge he can exploit in the real world, all while trying to actually be a decent boss to his totally terrified subordinates. The dad redemption arc is in full swing. Mark heads down to the courtyard to put his plan into action, strutting right up to the training grounds where the massive general of the ducal army, Dalton, is currently screaming at a recruit to put his back into it unless he wants to die on the battlefield. Dalton practically jumps out of his heavy armor in shock when he notices the Duke casually approaching. Mark smoothly asks to borrow 4 guards for a little trip into the forest, and a totally bewildered Dalton immediately barks at a knight named Roland to grab 3 others and serve as his grace's personal escort. When the squad lines up, which even includes a cool-looking wolf beastman, Dalton yells at them to move it unless they want to end up as monster food. Mark internally cringes as he notices the sheer dread on his guards' faces. You can practically hear them complaining in their heads about being dragged around by their rotten, tyrannical boss. Mark thinks to himself that he really is universally hated around here, but hey, at least Dalton lent him the troops without kicking up a fuss. Playing the part of a strict but dignified noble, Mark tells the general that this expedition will be a good learning experience for the men before declaring their departure. As our reincarnated gamer leads his new party out of the estate on horseback, he puts on his game face, absolutely determined to regain everyone's trust and dodge his doomed condemnation, ending at all costs. But while Mark is off trying to grind some real-life EXP, let's cut back to the mansion for a quick check-in on our main heroine. Standing under the running water of a hot shower, Fortuna is completely lost in thought, replaying that mind-blowing dinner conversation on a loop. She remembers the unexpected warmth in her father's eyes and his gentle smile as he told her she was far too beautiful, intelligent, and precious to just be given away to the royal family. The impact of those words is massive, mostly because that was literally the very first time in her entire 14 years of life that he had ever said something genuinely kind and loving to her. As the water cascades down, a soft, incredibly rare smile actually breaks through her usual emotionless facade. Leaning against the shower wall, she gently whispers to herself, "Father, what's come over you?" Yep, it looks like the grand defrosting of the Ice Princess has officially begun, and our boy Mark's survival rate is finally creeping up. Mark and his squad soon arrive at the edge of the ominously named Forest of No Return. Playing the commanding noble to perfection, he orders one guard to watch the horses and tells the other 3 to follow him because they're going hunting, adding that if they aren't back in an hour and a half, they need to report straight to Dalton. As they walk into the creepy woods, Mark's gamer brain is working in overdrive. According to his past life's memories, there should be an elven village hidden deep within this forest, and he's super eager to see if his meta-knowledge actually translates to reality. When a guard spots some rustling bushes and panics, Mark calmly reminds himself that regular wild animals don't really exist in these woods. It's just straight-up monsters. Time to test the waters. He activates a skill called Presence Detection. In the video game, this just put little red enemy icons on the minimap. But here in the real world, it gives him a literal sixth sense for nearby threats. His internal radar immediately pings, and he confidently tells his guards to step back because 3 monsters are incoming. Almost instantly, a pack of fierce horned wolves bursts out of the brush, roaring for a meal. The guards are absolutely bricking it, but Mark doesn't even flinch. With a totally relaxed smirk, he raises one hand, charges up a magic blast, and absolutely deletes the lead wolf with a point-blank explosion to the face. As the other 2 wolves lunge at him, he casually activates Flash Step, an ultra-high-speed movement skill that makes him literally teleport out of harm's way. Before the wolves even realize they hit empty air, Mark draws his sword and cleanly slices one of them right out of the sky. The guards immediately start clapping and hyping him up like fanboys, shouting about how amazing His Grace the Duke is. Mark sheathes his sword with a cool flick, silently relieved that even with his modern otaku memories mixed in, his muscle memory as one of the kingdom's finest magic swordsmen is still completely intact. Turns out, the stats of a doomed mid-boss are actually pretty cracked. However, looking down at the defeated low-level mobs, Mark realizes these wolves were way too weak to act as a proper benchmark for his true strength. He needs a real challenge. Suddenly, a massive light bulb goes off in his head. He remembers a secret piece of game lore. There's a hidden dungeon in this very forest. Not only does it have a proper boss to fight, but it also drops super rare items. And you know what our boy Mark immediately thinks of? Bribing his daughter, obviously. He instantly gets a ridiculous fantasy in his head where he hands Forsina a giant shiny gem, and she cries tears of joy, yelling that she loves him, sending his imaginary favorability meter straight through the roof. Fully motivated by the desperate need to farm those sweet, sweet dad points to avoid his execution, Mark turns to his completely confused guards with a determined glint in his eye. "You lot, we're heading a bit deeper in. Follow me," he commands, marching further into the dangerous woods to secure that epic loot. Mark stops his party in front of a massive, ancient-looking tree and puts his acting skills to the test. Putting on a serious face, he tells his guards to hang back because he's about to perform a secret art of House Bluemont that is strictly forbidden for them to see. The guards, completely terrified of crossing their boss, immediately salute and agree to keep watch from a distance. Meanwhile, Mark internally sweats, admitting to himself that he completely made that excuse up just to ditch them. Slipping out of sight behind the giant trunk, he places his hand on the bark and channels his mana to see just how much of the video game's logic still applies to this world. Instantly, a glowing, intricate magic circle appears on the wood, and the illusion fades away to reveal a hidden cave entrance right at the base of the tree. Mark is absolutely hyped. The game's hidden mechanics are 100% real. He confidently strolls into the Hermit's Trial dungeon, remembering that clearing this place won't just drop rare loot for his daughter bribery plan, but also grant him new skills at the deepest level. But before he can get too lost in his gamer thoughts, he encounters the dungeon's welcoming committee, a squad of puppet soldiers. These guys look like creepy wooden nutcrackers with cone heads holding spears, basically the ultimate trash mobs of this zone, and Mark treats them exactly like trash mobs. Shouting for them not to underestimate a mid-boss, he absolutely blitzes down the corridor, shredding the wooden puppets into kindling with a flashy combo of explosive magic and high-speed sword slashes, completely forcing his way through by sheer brute power. After easily wiping the floor with the mobs, he arrives in front of a massive wooden door without even breaking a sweat. He chuckles to himself, realizing that even for an early-game dungeon, this was ridiculously easy. The base stats of a Doom mid-boss really are something else. With a casual sing-song, "Excuse me," he pushes open the heavy doors and steps into the final chamber. Waiting for him in the center of the dark room is the Guardian Puppet, the official boss of the Hermit's Trial dungeon. It's a massive towering suit of spiked armor, holding a heavy broadsword and a thick shield. The giant armor slowly turns its horned helmet, its joints creaking menacingly as it locks onto the intruder. But instead of being intimidated by the hulking boss, Mark just smirks, his glasses catching the light. Finding the absolute perfect punching bag to properly gauge his solo capabilities, he draws his sword with a confident gleam in his eye, muttering, "Perfect. Let's give it a try." The Guardian Puppet wastes absolutely zero time and immediately lunges at Mark with a heavy, earth-shattering downward strike of its broadsword. Mark barely manages to dodge, muttering that the boss is way faster than he expected. He blocks a follow-up swipe with his own sword, the impact nearly sending him flying backward. Gah, as expected of a boss. Not bad at all, he thinks, quickly regaining his footing. But his gamer pride kicks in. As he stares down the hulking armor, the image of Forcina's smiling face and the terrifying threat of his impending execution flashes in his mind. He tightens his grip on his sword, mana igniting in his free hand, and declares, "But there's no way I can afford to lose." He instantly casts Flame Javelin, launching a massive explosive spear of fire directly into the boss's shield. The resulting explosion briefly staggers the giant, giving Mark the perfect opening. Using Flash Step, he instantly closes the distance and unleashes a wide-range area of effect expansion skill called Fierce Wave. The massive crescent of energy cleanly slices right through the thick armor, totally obliterating the Guardian Puppet into pieces. "And that's the boss defeated," Mark says with a satisfied smirk as the armor crumbles to dust. The loot instantly drops, and it's a massive haul, a glowing magic stone and the Spirit Tree staff. Mark happily inspects the drops. The magic bag looks plain, but its capacity is expanded by magic, and the Spirit Tree staff is a literal one-of-a-kind, ultra-rare item that heavily boosts spellcasters. He nods to himself, thoroughly convinced this will make the ultimate dad gift for his magically gifted daughter. Suddenly, a glowing orb of light descends from the ceiling, and a mysterious voice congratulates him on overcoming the trial, offering him one skill as a completion reward. A literal video game menu pops up in front of his face with three options: God's Strength, God's Wisdom, or God's Speed. Mark geeks out over how literal the game mechanics are in reality, and instantly selects God's Speed. The glowing orb shoots straight into his chest, and he immediately decides to test it out. He activates Flash Step again, and whoa! He literally moves so fast he turns into a blur, bouncing off the dungeon walls like a pinball. "My speed really has increased. Even my dynamic vision has improved," he yells in excitement. Fully satisfied that his meta-knowledge is going to be incredibly useful for surviving this world, Mark decides to head back to the estate. Later that evening, he's back at his desk, heavily scrutinizing the financial reports compiled by his steward, Mildart. He cringes as he sees just how much money he's been pouring into sketchy military affairs for his canceled villain arc, realizing he was even planning to raise taxes to fund his treason. He notes that Mildart looked incredibly tense when handing over the reports, so raising the loyal steward's opinion of him is definitely added to the to-do list. After all, Mildart is a highly capable man who has served since Mark's father's generation and is completely indispensable to running the duchy. But first things first. A knock at the door announces that dinner is ready, and Mark's eyes light up. The real priority right now is the central figure in his future condemnation event. He mentally hypes himself up to raise Forsina's favorability meter again tonight, proudly thinking about the ultra-rare magic staff he's got waiting for her. Time to play the gotcha of fatherhood. Mark sits down at the dinner table, fully prepared to initiate Operation Improve Favorability. Hoping to build on yesterday's success, he cheerfully kicks off a conversation, telling Forsina that he just finished brushing up on intermediate spells for the 4 basic elements. Trying to sound like an engaged dad, he casually asks how far along she is in her practical magic studies, specifically mentioning her talent for ice magic. But instead of continuing the chat, Forsina just gives a completely deadpan, "No, not particularly." Mark instantly breaks into a cold sweat. The mood isn't getting livelier at all. In fact, it's totally freezing over. Desperately looking for a lifeline, he notices Forsina's personal maid standing nearby. She literally averts her eyes with a hard "foip" sound as soon as he looks at her. Mark's heart drops. "Yep, I'm definitely hated," he mentally cries. But then his gamer brain kicks in again. He remembers the maid's name is Mial, and a massive realization hits him. Mial is turning her face away because she genuinely hates how cold and cruel Mark has been to Forsina all these years. Seeing an opportunity for a double kill in the favorability department, Mark points out that Mial seems to be a great source of support for his daughter. Mial immediately panics, probably thinking she's about to be executed for disrespect, and Forsina quickly bows her head, taking the blame and begging him to pardon her maid. But Mark totally flips the script. Putting on his warmest, most genuine dad smile, he says, "If she is loyal to you, then that is something to be praised. People like that are hard to come by. Cherish your loyal retainers." He mentally pumps his fist, realizing he's totally winning over Mial along with Forsina. Sensing the perfect opening for his ultimate move, Mark declares he has a gift for her. Reaching into his magically expanded bag, he pulls out the Spirit Tree staff, grinning like a total goofball, and tells her it's a rare piece of equipment he acquired in the Forest of No Return. Forsina is completely speechless, staring wide-eyed at her first real gift from her father. Mial gasps in shock as Mark cheerfully explains it should serve her well when casting magic. He unleashes his ultimate gift-giving attack, and it is a huge success. Forsina clutches the staff to her chest, her eyes tearing up with absolute joy as she beams the brightest, most adorable smile ever, thanking him profusely. Even Mial is wiping away happy tears in the background. Mark imagines both their favorability meters rocketing straight into the stratosphere. He lets out a massive sigh of relief, thinking that if he just keeps steadily showing her that he can be a kind father, his chances of being condemned should definitely drop. Even if he feels a little guilty, essentially bribing his way to survival. He watches fondly as Forsina happily whispers that she'll treasure the staff for the rest of her life, hoping that one day they can truly be like a normal father and daughter. It's a ridiculously wholesome moment, but don't forget, this is still a dark fantasy world, cut to a shadowy, grim prison cell somewhere deep within the estate. A sinister voice echoes in the darkness, reporting that the test subject's conditions remain stable, and there are no issues for continued use in the experiment. The camera pans over to reveal several girls, including a severely bandaged wolf beastman, locked away in horrible conditions. Standing in front of the cell is a creepy elf woman with a totally psychotic smile, her eyes half hidden in shadow as she softly chuckles. "Everything is proceeding according to plan," she whispers. It looks like our boy Mark might be fixing his dad game, but the original Duke's incredibly dark villainous legacy is still very much alive and kicking.